Good morning, boys and girls. Let's continue on with the ghost of Fossil Glen. As you know, remember we're still reading in. We read some of the diary where Allie's very much afraid because the last entry was the day before she went missing, and then Allie found the number to the listing for the homes or the property that the homes will sit on in the advertisement, and she's pretty sure RNG stands for Raymond Gagney, or Gag Me, as Lucy refers to him in the diary. So here we are. We're on chapter 20. On her way to school the next day, Allie was dismayed to see a bulldozer posed at the edge of the meadow. She stopped and stared. It looked like a huge, menacing yellow creature with a wide mouth made to scrape off the skin and dig deep into the guts of the earth, and treads designed to obliterate, everything in their path. She shuddered, imagining the thing at work. When she got to school, she groaned as she looked up at the blackboard and saw the words Pop Quiz Math. She was exhausted. How could she possibly concentrate? Allie had hardly slept all night, thinking about Raymond Gagney and how she could stop him from carrying out his plan. She stared wide-eyed into the darkness, hoping that Lucy's ghost would come to her and tell her what to do. She had gotten up 4 times to look in her journal to see if any helpful instructions had appeared. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping to see Lucy's face or hear Lucy's voice. Nothing. It seemed as if Lucy had abandoned her. Every time she began to feel that she might be drifting off to sleep, or imagined an image of Raymond Gagny would appear in her mind's eye. She'd never seen the man, but Lucy's vivid descriptions made him real to her. He knew who she was. He knew where she lived. He was right outside her door. No, he had climbed up and was peering in her window. No, he was under the bed. Yes, he was waiting for her to sleep so he could put his hands around her neck as he had done to Lucy, to silence her forever. Sleep had been impossible, but now that she was in school, she could hardly keep her eyes open. On the day of the math test. Terrific. As always, it was difficult to tell who felt worse about the quiz, the kids or Mr. Henry. He passed out the pages apologetically and told them to begin. Read each question carefully and do your best, he said. Allie read the first question. It was about 2 trains leaving a station at different times, traveling at different speeds. Which one would get from point A to point B first? Oh boy. She read the question again, then drew a little picture of 2 trains on her scratch paper. She drew point A and point B. She stared at the little trains, willing them to chug to point B so she could see which one would arrive first. They didn't move. This is ridiculous, she thought. I've got to wake up and think. I've got to be logical. She turned back to the problem with ferocious concentration. There was a formula for calculating the answer. She simply had to remember it. Slowly she worked her way down the page, carefully filling in answers with her pencil. Soon she came to the question that made her smile. Mr. Henry put 1 or 2 gag questions in every test, just for fun. This time the question was, "Who's buried in Grant's tomb?" Jenny grinned. "Who's buried in Lucy's grave?" The question came to her. Answer: no one. Lucy's body was never found. Allie tried to remember what she had read in the newspaper account about the search. Police figured that Lucy had fell from the cliff. Since her body wasn't at the bottom of the glen where she had fell, they assumed that it had been carried downstream. That was logical. Then once it wasn't anywhere along the creek's banks, they calculated that it had been washed out into the lake by the high waters of early spring. Again, logical. But, thought Alec excitedly, Lucy didn't fall. She was pushed by Raymond Gagney, and if he tried to strangle her first, the way he had in Alec's dream, maybe he didn't want the body to be found. Maybe he had counted on the police figuring things out exactly the way they did, which meant that he must have done something with Lucy's body. Although Alec thought about that, gazing fixed into space, trying to picture the scene, a dark, rainy night, a murderer standing on the cliff, staring down at the body of his victim far below in the deep and isolated glen, hoping her body would be swept away, then realizing the risk if the body was ever recovered. What could he do? She felt someone's eyes on her and looked up. Mr. Henry was gazing at her with a worried expression on his face. He pointed to his watch and mouthed the words, "Get to work." Reluctantly, Allie forced her thoughts back to the quiz. When Mr. Henry called for the papers to be handed forward, she had actually answered all of the questions, even though she got most of them right. Mr. Henry announced that since it was raining, with occasional bursts of thunder and lightning, they would postpone their trip to Fossil Glen until the following day. Joy raised his hand. "Did you see the sign at the Glen about building houses there?" Mr. Henry looked disturbed. "Yes, I saw that," he said, "and I find it puzzling. My understanding was that the owner, Mrs. Stiles, wanted to leave the Glen as it is for everyone to enjoy. I'm really surprised that she allowed this, but sometimes people have to do things they'd rather not do." "We could write a letter to her," said Dub, "and tell her we've been learning all about the Glen and don't think she should let it be ruined." He looked at Allie, who shrugged and nodded. It wouldn't hurt. She hadn't had any luck phoning Lucy's mother, but perhaps Mr. Henry could help them track her down. Allie was willing to bet that Mrs. Stiles, or Mrs. Gagney, as whatever her name was now, didn't know what Gagney was up to. "That's a good idea," said Mr. Henry. "What did the rest of you think?" "Yeah, great idea. Let's do it." "Okay," said Mr. Henry. "Tomorrow during our field trip we'll make a list of everything we see and all the reasons why we think the Glen should be preserved." "Can you bring Hoover tomorrow?" Brad asked. "Please," begged Julie. "Please," chorused 23 other voices. Mr. Henry smiled. His dog not only had been to school on many occasions, but had also accompanied the class on several field trips, including one to a local farm where she'd raced through the orchard and eaten the cores of everyone's apple. There had been one anxious moment when she had disappeared. The class found her. She was happily rolling in a large smelling mound of cow manure behind the barn. Even with all the windows down on the ride bus open on the ride back to school was something none of them were likely to forget. "Good idea," said Mr. Henry. "I'm glad you thought of it. Hoover will be happy, I'm sure. But if I bring her, you'll have to help me keep an eye on her. I don't think there's any cow manure in the Glen, but you never know what she's likely to get into." "We'll watch her," Julie promised. "All right," said Mr. Henry. "Miss Hoover will join us. Now, since we won't be going outside today, let's get back to the library and continue our search there. I want you to look for field guides that will help us identify the things that we see in the Glen tomorrow. Let's go." Allie went straight to Mrs. Foster and asked if she could look again at the newspaper articles about the Glen. Dub joined her as she began reading each entry carefully. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "I don't know. A clue, maybe? Something I missed the first time? Or a mention of Gagney?" "Yeah," said Dub. "If the police were suspicious of him back then, they might believe us if we tell them about our theory." "Maybe," said Allie doubtfully, "if we leave out that we got our information from Lucy's ghost. But they have to pay attention to a murderer." "Murderer, ghost," said a scornful voice. Allie and Dub looked up to see Karen Lever standing behind them. "Don't tell me Allie sucked you into her ridiculous stories now, Dub." "Nobody's talking to you, Karen," said Dub. "But I heard you," answered Karen. "It says in the newspaper plain as day what happened to that girl, Lucy Stiles. She fell. Somebody falls and gets hurt in the Glen almost every year. But Allie has to turn everything into a big, hairy deal." "Why don't you go mind your own business?" said Dub. "Gladly," said Karen. "It's bad enough that Mr. Henry has made Allie his little pet. I'm surprised that you're falling for her silly stories, too." With a disdainful toss of her braid, she walked away. "That's the same as disgusted." Allie sat where she was, trying to sort out the confusing rush of feelings Karen's remarks had sent flooding through her. What was Karen talking about? She sounded, well, if Allie didn't know better, she'd think Karen was jealous. Once again, Karen had managed to take Allie by surprise, attacking and then retreating, before Allie had time to take in what Karen had said, and certainly before Allie had time to think of something to say. Looking at Dove, she shook her head in consternation. "I wish I knew why she hates me so much." "Forget it, Al," said Dub. "It's a game she plays. She doesn't have anything better to do. But we have, so let's keep looking." They went over every account of the disappearance of Lucy Stiles, but found nothing new and no evidence that Raymond Gagney had been a suspect. "Now what?" asked Dub. Well, we can hope that your idea about writing to Lucy's mother might at least stop the bulldozers, but that won't help us prove that Lucy was murdered. There had to be a way, Allie thought, about what she had read, about all that had happened. She reminded herself that she wasn't even 12 years old yet, but she was alive, she told herself, and strong and pretty smart. For some reason, Lucy had chosen her. She owed it to Lucy to see that Raymond Gagney did not get away with murder. Okay, boys and girls, that was kind of a long chapter. 21 is very short, so we will read it and then we'll stop. After school, Allie waved goodbye to Deb, who was riding his bike to an appointment at the orthodontist office. Karen and Pam walked off together, pointedly ignoring Allie. Allie stood for a moment outside the building, thinking. Her mind wasn't on Karen or Pam, however, but on Lucy. Allie's parents were both at work. Michael was at the babysitter, so there was no reason to go straight home. Dub was right. She had things to do. She pulled up the hood of her rain parka and headed over to Fossil Glen. The day's downpour had slowed to a cold, soggy drizzle as she walked across the meadow. The sky was such a low, dark gray that it felt much later than 3:30 in the afternoon. Wispy fog floated over the tall grass of the meadow and hovered above the deep ravine of the glen, obscuring the edge of the cliffs. Trees seemed to rise eerily out of the mist, only to disappear again in the murky dimness. Allie wasn't sure she should go to the Glen, but she felt drawn to the scene of Lucy's death. She held the vague hope that being at the very spot where Lucy had plunged off the cliff would provide a clue or help her to know what to do next, and she admitted to herself she hoped that Lucy would appear or speak to her again. Allie stopped near the cliff's edge, or at least what she sensed was the edge. The whole world seemed to be made of the same gray swirling mist. It made her feel oddly off balance and unreal. She stood peering down. Occasional breaks in the fog allowed her glimpses of the rushing waters of Fossil Green Creek below. This was the spot where Lucy had stood right before she fell. Allie pictured Lucy growing too warm in her blue sweatshirt, pulling it over her head and setting it down on the path, along with the fossils she had found. What happened next? Suddenly it seemed to Allie that she was back in her horrible nightmare, the one in which she felt hands tightening around her neck, the one in which she had been falling and falling and falling. Once more the tumbling girl became not Allie but Lucy. Allie felt a strange, menacing presence nearby, but couldn't dispel the vision filling her brain. She cringed as the plunging figure plunged towards the ground. Then the scene in her mind grew darker, as if evening had become true night. Someone was holding the girl by the arms and dragging her roughly upstream, grunting with the effort. Allie could make out only a shadowy figure and the sounds of his struggle, which was made more difficult by something he held in his hand. A noise behind her broke the spell of the horrifying vision. She turned and peered through the mist. She could see no more than a few feet in any distance, except when the fog whirled in the wind and opened like a curtain, allowing her a momentary glimpse through the trees. She saw no one, but there was the sound once more, soft, slow, like muffled footsteps, and again closer this time. The sensation of a menacing presence that she had felt in the dream was with her, only it was real now. Someone was on the cliff path with her. For a moment she stood frozen, heart fluttering in her throat, eyes wide, trying desperately to see through the haze. She dreaded hearing the next step, but one part of her mind was waiting for it, so she could figure out where it was coming from and run the other way. There, the snap of a twig and the frank swish of a branch snagging on cloth, up the path to the right, very close. Why, she wondered wildly, would anyone approach from such stealth and caution? Perhaps she tried to tell herself the person was lost in the fog and frightened. Should she call out and announce herself? No. It was the voice, Lucy's voice. Run fast. Panic stricken now, Allie turned and fled down the path to the left. She wanted only to escape, to put distance between herself and those creepy footsteps. Holding her hands out in front of her to help her on her way, she ran stumbling down the wet, slippery trail, twigs snagging her jeans, whipping her face as she raced blindly forward, the sound of her own flight so loud in her ears that she had no idea whether or not she was being followed. She was far too frightened to stop and find out. At last she came to a place where the fog had lifted slightly, and she could see the meadow open before her. The ghostly shapes of the school's playground equipment appeared out of the murk. With her breath ripping raggedly from her throat, she ran toward the sliding board, the swing set, and the jungle gym. Tears streamed from her eyes, so glad she was able to see the familiar objects, looking safe and normal in their usual places. Only when she was on the high street sidewalk did she stop and look behind her. She saw nothing but the school grounds, the meadow, and the monstrous shape of the bulldozer rising from the low-lying fog like a prehistoric creature. But Allie knew that someone was there, just beyond her vision, hidden by the mist and the trees. Hugging her rain parka tight to her shivering body, she ran home and locked the doors behind her. And that's where we're going to stop for today. I hope you've enjoying our book. If there are any words you do not know, remember you have a dictionary on the laptop or iPad, or if you have a hardback bound book, look it up in there. Those words are easy to find. Thank you and have a great weekend. Talk to you on Monday. Bye.